Welcome to episode 131 of the Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. In today's episode, I'm excited to introduce you to Jez Groom and April Vellacott, co-authors of Ripple. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce you to Jez Groom and April Velikot, co-authors of the book Ripple, The Big Effects of Small Behavior Changes in Business. Jez and April work together at Cowry Consulting in the UK, which he founded in 2015. Cowry incorporates behavioral science into recommendations for all sorts of clients, including one fascinating study you'll hear about today, where they made workplaces safer by painting the walls pink. During the conversation, we talk about lots of concepts like nudges, anchoring, framing, loss aversion, priming, and more. And all those past episodes are linked for you in the show notes, as well as their fantastic book, Ripple. The episode's show notes can be found within the app you're listening to or at thebrainybusiness.com/131. Those already on the Brainy Business list got a direct link from me in the email you receive every Friday. To join the list, simply sign up for any freebie at thebrainybusiness.com and you will be automatically added. And for those of you in the States, you can sign up easily by texting the word Brainy, BRAINY, to 33777. You'll be added to the list and get access to a super secret subscribers page with more than 50 freebies as a thank you. All right, let's get right to it. Jez, April, welcome to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Thank you so much for having us.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm so excited to talk with you about the book Ripple, of course, but just, the really great work that you all are doing in the behavioral science space. So would love to hear just, for the audience to learn a little bit more about you, your backgrounds, what got you excited and passionate in this behavioral science space. And you guys can, rock, paper, scissors or whatever for who goes first. Maybe you have a system by now.
Yeah. April goes first. She's far better. So I think we're anchored by good experience and I just follow.
I was probably first interested in how you kind of nudge people's behavior. I was just fascinated by kind of 50s advertising when I was a child. I'd buy these big kind of coffee table books and just love kind of leafing through the really clever different advertising campaigns. And then I ended up studying psychology at university for my undergrad and kind of couldn't believe my luck. It just was, it's just the most interesting thing to me. And I think loads of people find it interesting, don't they? Because it's about us, psychology. So, I don't know anyone who's not interested in why the people around them behave. So after doing psychology undergrad, I worked for a few years in advertising, but not the creative side of it. More the kind of media side of it, which is actually quite similar to Jez's background, incidentally. And then I went on to study behaviour change at master's level. And that was like being given the keys to a really fancy car for me. It was just amazing to think about how you actually start designing interventions to actually change behaviour for good. And then whilst I was doing that, I came across the work that Jez was doing with Cowry Consulting, and I'm lucky enough to join them when I graduated. And so that's where we're at now. And then we wrote the book together over the course of a year, and it's been such an amazing journey.
Well, I love all of that. And so I read that your thesis had to do with using behavioral science in cybersecurity. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, but when you kind of you're doing your thesis, they sometimes give you this big list of different supervisors and various different topics, and I wasn't quite interested in all of them. So I went looking for something a bit different, and there was this guy who was really interested in how you kind of use nudging and behavior change to help people make their homes more secure. So obviously, with people buying things like voice assistants like Google Homes, or even things like smart light bulbs, or smart fridges, people just don't think about the security of those items. So what he was really interested in doing was developing with the UK government a kind of like traffic light system that would almost act like a little label that was a heuristic on these products to help get people thinking about the security of these products that they were buying, because they actually make people quite vulnerable to hacking and all sorts of other threats. So that's what we worked on together. We were kind of testing this concept.
Interesting. I wish that I had been given a list of people and topics to work with when I was doing my different thesis projects. In my undergrad thesis, I went through this process of being, like everything I turned in, they said, no, that doesn't work. Like, no, change it. We don't like it. It's like, can you give me some parameter? Anything that would work better? What are we talking about here? So definite overwhelmed brain situation with the paradox of choice, right? When you could talk about anything, it's impossible to pick something. It's really a difficult process.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so much easier sometimes to be creative when you're given constrictions, isn't it? It's kind of, it reduces that choice and that ambiguity. And then it's much easier to come up with something original.
Yeah, I love that. Well, let's go ahead and hear from Jez. Jez, tell us a little bit about you.
As April said, so I feel like I'm in my second career. So my first career was in advertising and I really enjoyed that. And within that, we used to do, I suppose, communication-based behaviour change campaigns, so posters for the government. And then, I got, I suppose, caught up in the wave of behavioural science really early. So this is actually my third behavioural science practice. So I had one in 2009 that I was just trying to figure out, whether people were interested or not within business, and they were. I then sort of left that organisation to then go and work with Rory at Ogilvy. So we co-founded Ogilvy Change, which is one of the early sort of behavioural science practices. Yeah, we had a lot of fun. So we were just trying to figure out quite a few things, really, whether behavioural science worked, whether it was valuable, whether people would pay for it, how much they would pay, who could do it, what skills were required. Yeah, I made some brilliant mistakes along the way that we've documented in Ripple, good mistakes, but some real achievements. I remember creating sort of nudge doc with Rory and the team. So sitting at the end of a pier in the south of England, deciding this would be a great venue to create the first ever sort of behavioural science sort of festival. Hence it became Woodstock Nudge Doc. And then, and that was brilliant. I think what the guys have done with that. But yeah, I've always been an entrepreneur, not in a kind of like a megalomaniac kind of way that is motivated by, billion-dollar unicorns, but being at the beginning of something and also creating jobs. So one of the things that I'm really, really enjoying is hiring new people. So we just hired sort of 4 new people at Cowry, even through sort of quite difficult times at COVID, but the team have really, really pulled out all the stops and we've managed to have a good year despite that. So I'm thoroughly enjoying myself at Cowry. The team are amazing. They always say hire bigger and better than yourself. And April is one of those people that are just amazing. And I can't wait really to see kind of the next phase of behavioural science. It feels like we're out of the proof of concept now, and we're really into how do we scale this up, and it's really, really exciting. And hopefully be a part of that before I move on to my third career, which I don't know what that'll be in whatever time, but let's see.
Yeah, well, I usually ask at the end, kind of that, like, what do you think is next for the field? But it felt like a good segue. So, what are you excited about on the horizon of behavioral science?
I think one big thing. There's so much focus on sort of essentially Western weird world in psychology and behavioural science. So, I'm not bored, but I don't want to read about students getting points doing psychological studies in an Ivy League university or in a London-based university in behavioural science. I just think, okay, that's interesting, but is it really replicable anywhere else in the world? Is it culturally relevant? So recently, a number of us across the world have come together as a collective of applied behavioural scientists to create a network, like a business network, that drives cross-cultural insights and work called Diversify. And Cowry is a significant part and contributes to that, as are we all. And so I can't wait for more and more and more and more non-weird behavioural science applications and studies, such that we really understand what behavioural science means in, Pacific Islands off New Zealand, as we mean in, some islands in the Philippines, or maybe in slightly different circumstances in the Middle East, in Iran, down to Sierra Leone. I think it's just absolutely fascinating that, there's just not enough work done in those areas, and people want to do the work. So, bring on diversity in behavioural science, I think.
I love that. I have been, with having the podcast, it's amazing where I will have people reach out to me from all over the world and will say, I'm in Peru and there's not much happening here yet. I'm in the Ukraine and there's not much happening here yet. And like, what's your advice? What should I do? Sort of questions is that people are trying to figure out if they should go get a degree. What should they do? Where could they even work? Trying to figure out with jobs in that space. So I love hearing that there's pockets of awesomeness sort of budding up, in this way. So that's great.
Yeah. And I think we've got an agenda, which is behavioural science shouldn't be exclusive. You shouldn't have to go to a London-based or North American, Canadian-based university at great cost to be able to be a qualified practitioner. So we're really going to be championing, as you say, some of those smaller territories to start to develop their own, as some of the studies that April has done, to a postgraduate level, such that, you can get your postgraduate studies in Bombay. That's kind of our ambition is why not, so it should be freely available to all, or an investment of time and cost, but available to all would be a good start.
Yeah, that's great. So do you have advice for those who are listening from around the world of what they should be doing? Should they just follow Diversify and see what comes up over the years, or?
Yeah, I think follow, but get in touch. One of the values that we've got is openness and strength. Our strength is our diversity. So and our strength is in our differences. So get in touch. We're starting to create a business network, and if we can help in any way, we'll definitely do that. I don't know what it's going to be, but I'm sure you'll have a friendly and approachable response, and we'll help in whatever way we can.
Awesome. Well, I love that. Well, thank you for going off on that little side path before we got started. I'm all about squirrels and things like that. So, but let's talk about some of the projects that you've worked on, things that you really enjoy. I know in the book you talk about some painting pink walls and baby faces, which I think are some, priming examples, which we can talk about. But do you have some favorites maybe that you don't get to talk about as much, or maybe those are ones you want to chat about? I like to leave it open.
I don't know, April, do you want to talk about pink walls? Because you know that case study pretty well. And it's kind of, I think the good thing about it is it's end to end, and it's got a few different moving parts. It's got the pink walls, but it's got some other things as well. And I know you like that one.
I love to talk about preventing falls with pink walls. Yeah. It really tends to capture people's imagination, this one, because it feels so counterintuitive, but also it's so visual. Like everyone can kind of visualize what a bright pink wall looks like. But are really surprised to hear that it can actually change mainly blokes' behaviour on a building site. So this story comes towards the end of the book. So it comes towards the end of Ripple. So we actually structured the book so that each chapter kind of builds on the previous one. So we kind of start from the very beginning of kind of where you kind of begin on your journey with applying behavioural science in business. And the stories at the very end are kind of bringing all of these learnings together, kind of culminating in a bit of a finale. So this story comes towards the very end, and it's set on the south bank of the Thames in London on a construction site. So most people we talk to, that they aren't that closely acquainted with all of the workings behind a construction business. But basically, in the UK right now, there are barely any safety incidents on construction sites. So everything is really super safe, and nobody dies. But when you do have any kind of safety incident, you're actually required by law to record it. And so health and safety becomes actually really important for construction companies, because if you're trying to win a contract, if you're charging the same price for the job, but then one of you has no safety incidents, that's probably who they're going to go with. So they were really interested in seeing how we could use behavioural science to nudge people to be safer on these construction sites. And, you've got lots of different teams working on a construction site. But one of these teams are called fit-out specialists. So they're basically the ones who come in towards the very end, and they kind of do all the kind of final touches on a building. So they kind of do kind of like the wall finishings, the light finishings, all the kind of soft furnishings, the carpets. They kind of make the inside of the building really beautiful. And, a lot of the time they're having to work on like quite high up ceilings. And so they might have to like climb up platforms, and they're kind of taking risks because they're having to go up and down these platforms every day. They're supposed to lock the wheels on these platforms, but, you can imagine it's a bit quicker if you can just nip up and not lock the wheels and then nip down and kind of move it along. So yeah, we came in to help nudge them to be a bit safer on site. We actually came up with quite a few interventions in tandem, but the one which is kind of the headline is we painted the walls of their canteen pink. And, as I'm sure you're aware, Baker Miller pink has kind of, it's been shown in some contexts to kind of reduce testosterone and calm down levels of aggression and stuff. And one of the things that we identified when we did our behavioural audit on site was that, it's a very blokey male environment, and lots of them were kind of had this overconfidence that nothing bad would happen to them. And so one of our interventions was about kind of reducing testosterone and kind of calming them down. So we kind of painted the walls of their canteen pink to kind of give them this almost chill out zone that would kind of help kind of decompress and make them less likely to cut corners. And we also did a couple of other interventions. So we also had a kind of reward scheme. So you were given, instead of being given like a red card if you did something bad on site, which is what they had in place, we changed that to a gold card scheme. So everyone had a gold card, and it was kind of theirs to lose. So if they did something bad, we kind of had that loss aversion there, that they then lose their gold card. And everyone who had their gold card at the end of the week was entered into a prize draw. So this was it was another way to kind of motivate them to follow the health and safety and behave safely on site. And so that all those interventions together combined to have a really amazing cumulative effect on their behaviour. So it reduced unsafe behaviours when I'll get these mixed up. It reduced, was it Jez? Was it unsafe behaviours when working at height was reduced by
82, I think, and then I think material movement was like 92.
Yeah, so huge shift in behaviour.
Right, and that's a percentage, right? So 82% reduction and a 92%.
Yeah.
Yep, that sounds significant to me.
I think significant. Peace score, I think, was 1 in 69 for working at height, and then it's like 1,000. There's over 1 in 2,000, I think, for the material movement. So both of them were significant to academic standards in terms of the Peace score. So yeah, it was amazing, really. It was like a tenth or a 12th or an eighth of the incidents that it was before. So the good thing is that they've now included, I think April was sort of saying that there's site safety standards. So every site they do now, they paint the walls pink and have the reward scheme and do the walk around, because it doesn't cost them any more money than it did before. And we talk about that in the book, which is, if you're a hardcore behavioural scientist, it's crazy to do 3 interventions all at once because you don't know what intervention is working. And we go, but the challenge that we have is, if you've got one shot at changing behaviour, to essentially, I suppose, make it incredibly complicated at significantly more cost and time for the client, they might not do the experiment at all. And their view is that if we can do all 3 every time we roll this out, then we'll just take that risk. So from a business perspective, it makes complete sense. But from a behavioural science perspective, I guess it could be frustrating also, because you don't understand what's working hard and what's not. But I think we're pragmatic enough to go, clients really, really happy and people are safer. So what's the issue?
Yeah.
So.
I think it's a really interesting shift, actually. Hearing you say that reminds me, Jez, it's a really interesting shift from moving from studying behavioural science in a university context to then helping businesses with it. Because I think, I remember seeing some of Cowry's case studies when I was kind of fresh out from my master's. And what you get taught in an academic context is you kind of get trained to be hypercritical of experimental design and basically picking out all the experimental flaws. And I think that's probably my first question as well about any case study was, how can you know that it was your intervention that actually changed that specific behaviour? And I think, it's a real shift to then go from that perspective to, actually, all we care about is helping a business in any way we can. So why wouldn't we do 3 interventions at once if combined it was going to help improve something like health and safety?
Right. Well, and in the case that you're talking about here, where it's all the changes are incredibly affordable and very much worth doing. So, if it's they're all some, huge amount of money and time investment to be able to do, to where it's a question of whether it's going to be worth it to be replicating over time, then, sure, be really, really sure that one thing is important. But, painting a wall, that's very cheap, and swapping out the color of cards you were handing out anyway, cheap. Those are all, and it's very much, if you're not going to get the project because your safety numbers are bad, it's definitely worth doing.
Yeah, and our ambition isn't to write an academic paper that can be peer reviewed to show that priming has got statistical significance with no confounding variables.
Right.
That's not what we were there to do. The client didn't say, I don't really care whether people are safe or not, but there's this journal of psychology that I'd really, really like to get into, and I'd like to do peer review. They didn't say that. And I respect both disciplines, and I get frustrated sometimes that sometimes when we do things in a messy world, it's seen as maybe not as professional as academic standard, and you kind of go, there's just 2 different rules of the game in my view, and I think there's got to be respect for both. And sometimes I don't think there is. But that's my view.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And especially in the 2, applied behavioral science, applied behavioral economics is just, it's a different animal, and it has a reason to be there, and it should work well with the academic research that's being done. There's a balance to them of being able to have some of that replication or not in the real world. But there's a real art in being able to, and I love doing this and partnering with academic teams and whatnot, but being able to go to the business and talk about what their goals are and understand how you can apply and what matters, just like you're doing at Cowry, and to say, okay, I know what we can try. I've read the literature. I know how this works, and we'll test some of these things. And you can really walk that line in a way that it can make a difference for a business without that. The academic rigor is just not as important in some of those applied tests. And if it works and you have an idea of why it works, then you can try to apply it somewhere else. But then I think too, I've been having some conversations on these interviews recently of knowing that it's not everything is generalizable across contexts and from one business to the next, from one application to the next. So like the pink wall doesn't necessarily just work across the board, but it's the idea behind the pink wall that matters, right? And then thinking about that for future projects.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's definitely the case that context really, really matters, and it's the application. It's kind of like, okay, does this work in the real world? And does it change? Really the case.
Yeah. So, April, I know you had mentioned as you were just starting to talk about the preventing falls with pink walls, that you had talked about how the book is structured and kind of going through this adding on process. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that process is built out so people kind of get an idea of what they'll get for when they pick up their own copy of Ripple?
Oh, I love that. Yes. It's the default. They're going to go and yes. Buy it and read it. Yeah. We basically think about anyone who's working in business or anyone who's kind of interested in applying behavioral science in their life. It might not be for a business. I guess it might be for charity. It might be for their book club. I don't know. It walks you through that journey of the kind of steps that you need to take. So, for example, the very first step is about convincing other people in your organization that behavioral science is an amazing tool which applies not only to them, but also to the context in which you're operating. And so it's kind of things like, to conduct a small experiment in that context. So conduct an experiment in your book club to demonstrate to the people at the book club that it's not just something in theory. It's not this kind of nebulous concept. It actually does apply to them. And we kind of go from there to kind of things like how to kind of workshop an idea with lots of different people, through to things like if you're trying to scale behavioral science across a huge multinational organization, the kind of steps that Jez has found that working with massive businesses really, really work to scaling behavioral science as a kind of core tool across a whole business. So there's stuff in there for companies of kind of various sizes, and kind of wherever you are at on your journey, it's just full of practical tips about how to get started.
Love it. So, Jez, we heard one of April's favorite case studies, examples, projects. Do you have something? I saw you flipping through the book, trying to find some of those hidden gems, perhaps.
Yeah, there's some interventions that capture imagination because they're so counterintuitive. And I think the baby's faces, I think, is one of those, that you've got essentially extreme antisocial behaviour, and that can be solved by something so cute. And that's very, very powerful. And there's a physiological response, and then that generates a psychological response. And I think behavioural science, it's a bit like flying the urinal type work and pink walls. I think there's those sorts of solutions. There's one thing that bugs me about behavioural scientists sometimes, and in a kind of a positive way. I mean, I sort of, just an observation, is that sometimes behavioural science is at its best when it's just really simple. It just crushes everything to something that is so obvious. And I just sense sometimes there's a cohort of behavioural scientists that feel that's kind of cheating, and it should be more complex. And I just find it a little bit frustrating sometimes, because ultimately the objective of a behavioural scientist should be to change behaviour for the better. It shouldn't be, I want to be the cleverest person in the room. And that's sometimes why I sort of go, really, maybe the objectives are different. But my favourite sort of intervention was one of the simplest ones in the book. And I was reminded of it fairly recently. So one of my sort of colleagues who I was working with at the time subsequently turned up as a client in a client business, and she reminded me of kind of like, she said, "Oh God, Jez, good to get in contact, and remember that work we did." I said, "Yeah, it's in the book." And she's like, "What book?" And as we got to a really good conversation, I said, "It's in there." And I sort of held the page up on the video call. Mm-hmm. So there it is. And she went, "God, that's what it was." And so essentially this was, it was just going back to some of those cross-cultural insights. So we did some work in South Africa. We started to immerse ourselves into the kind of like the behavioural problem. And so we were out in the townships. It was amazing. So, we went to some more of the sort of formal areas like Soweto. We kind of did that in Joburg and Cape Town, and then some of the really informal townships, and people that kind of literally living in poverty. And we had this brief, and this brief was for people that were, say, living in Soweto, was unlike in the UK, that was the context that I'd sort of lived in, was that when people have got mobile phones, they have one SIM card that they tend to get, and they put it in their phone, and it stays in their phone for like 2 years. And they never change it, and they just have the deal that telephone supplier has given them. It might be like Vodacom, Vodafone, or it might be EE, etc. But it was quite different in South Africa, because different tariffs and different SIM cards actually gave you better deals. So it was like, if you wanted to ring abroad, use this SIM card. If you want to ring your family and friends locally at this time of day, use this SIM card. If you want to text, then use this SIM card. If you want to download data on Saturday at 2:00, it's this SIM card. So often there'd be like multiple SIM cards sort of held, and some of them would be stored in the phone. So some phones got flexibility like 2, but literally they'd be like, just changing them around. It was kind of a weird concept for us, but totally culturally relevant there. And then the brief we had was essentially go into these stores that supplied the SIM cards. And what they wanted to do was make sure that the SIM cards were bought at this store, because every time the phone was used, then essentially the store that sold the SIM card would get some form of commission paid on the data and the calls that were used. So their brief was, we want to make sure that all the SIM cards are bought from our store. And you could get these SIM cards anywhere. And there was always deals on these SIM cards. They didn't cost anything to pick them up. But as you usually have to use them, there might be a free period or there might be a very small charge. And then over time, it got bigger. But the critical thing was everyone bought them from this store. You were the store that sold the first SIM card. And even if you started to top it up, like 6 months later, you would still get the commission. So what the store arrangement was, and like I think April wrote about it with just brilliantly in the book, is to say that like in the beginning of the day, essentially this store sold anything from like children's school uniforms and flip-flops to SIM cards to, it's kind of like one of those stores that everything, and it was relatively low price. But it was beautiful in the morning, amazingly organised. But obviously, with the maelstrom of the townships sort of hitting them, essentially everything's on the floor in a mess. Everything's been tried on and thrown up in the air, basically. So quite a chaotic sort of environment. And they had these like plastic sort of packed SIM cards, and the challenge was, how do we get them to make sure they buy the first one from us? And we had all these very, very clever people, all these behavioural scientists. We did training and induction, and we came up with lots and lots of intervention ideas. And it was a brilliant day. The food was amazing. So one of the things that I said to April was, one of my tips was, when you're running a workshop, always make sure the food is good. But we took that out, I think, in the end. And because if you have a workshop where the food is bad, everyone remembers the bad food instead of the good ideas. Mm-hmm. And it was maybe a little bit too trite, but maybe not a behavioural science sort of insight, but it's definitely the case. Anyway, we had this workshop. It was amazing. The food was amazing. We had this barbecue, and it was just great. And all the ideas were quite complex. And then we just sort of got to this point, and then someone had the idea. They said, why don't we just bundle up all the SIM cards? So when they pick up one, they pick up 4. So they always get them from our store. And we were like, okay. So like if they pick all 4 up, that means they don't need to go to another store. Yeah. So rather than like picking like one of the 4, they pick all 4. And we're going, and we're going to have, so what we like put tape around it, or we put them in, so let's do that. So the first kind of inception was essentially, it was kind of just a bundle, which essentially was putting all these 4 things together. And then we then merchandised it, or the business merchandised it in these pep stores to the Ring a Saver pack, where you could get all 4, and that was it. And it was, transformational. And when I look back on sort of behavioural science sort of interventions, it just seems so simple. And you can say, look, people follow the path of least resistance. There's a status quo bias. Once you pick up one, you're more likely to use them. Loss aversion, you've already got them. You can wrap it up and all that sort of stuff, but it's a damn simple idea that really, really works. And I think we should celebrate that more, that sometimes I think behavioural science tries to make things too complicated and sound too intellectual, when actually a lot of the instances can be conveyed and executed in really simplistic terms. And that doesn't mean they're any less genius. It just means that they're simpler. So I think that's it. And one of the, just to sort of finish on that note, April was talking about how we wrote the book. We spent a lot of time thinking about shape and structure of the book, such that it was really easy to read, understand and use. And we always knew that that's going to most probably make some people a bit irate, because they like complexity. But our book was written for kind of business people, so they could pick it up and adopt this relatively quickly. It wasn't written for people that have spent a year of their life studying it at a cost of £15,000 to £40,000, who are incredibly motivated. What we were trying to do was capture business people's imaginations such that they go, wow, this stuff sounds fascinating. I feel like I can do it. I need some help. But I really want to get involved, rather than some of the literature, which is just a bit hard, and we know give up.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said for just making sentences really simple to read and to understand. But I guess often academic papers can just be full of jargon, can't they? So like Jez said, we've tried to use like really simple and clear language, and we've got a kind of a bit of a cheat sheet at the front for like all of the biases that we refer to, so that if you're not super familiar with all the concepts, you can kind of keep on referring back to those. and we've kind of chunked it into really manageable steps to make it really easy to digest. And we've also pulled out the most important bits to make them more salient. So we had a wonderful typesetters at our publishers who did a beautiful job of pulling out the key quotes so that they were kind of really, really easy to see and digest. And we've also pulled out the toolkit separately at the end of each chapter, and then again at the end of the book, so that it kind of it makes it easier to kind of hold on to those key takeaways. Because I don't know if you're anything like me, but after I've read a book, I remember it for about 2 days and then it goes out of my head. So it's nice to have something to refer back to, a little cheat sheet.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very much the tactic so that for my own, which my book is coming soonish in a world where I don't know when this is coming out and all that, but did a very similar approach to it. And I can tell we're very like-minded. And for everyone listening to the podcast, I'm sure that they're just saying like, oh, that's exactly what we do here. Like, that's why people come to the Brainy Business Podcast, is that same simplicity piece. Like, it does not have to be the boring. Yeah, I agree. Some of the academic papers, you kind of go, okay, all right, like get me to what are we talking about here? Where's the meat? And then I can go share the meat with the world, right? I don't need some of these other things, which do matter in academia. They're there for a reason, but not necessarily in this case.
Right. I mean, I think everyone at Cowry loves reading academic papers. It takes me about 3 times, to be fair, but everyone loves reading the papers. We have a database of over 5,000 papers that gets updated monthly, reinterpretations of previous studies, new studies and stuff. So everyone is like super excited. So I just want the listeners, we really love and respect all of that amazing work that's done. And I think, it's written in that particular style for a particular reason, for a particular audience, to get a particular response. And that's great. It's just that when we start to move into other areas, it doesn't translate that quickly and effectively. And that's fine too. And we're just helping, a lot of our clients that we work with, they've just, like everyone, had a really tough year. And, they just want some help and support. They've got some objectives themselves. The business has got some objectives, and they just want people that can help them do that, and do that as frictionless and effortless for them as possible, with a great result for all. And that's kind of our ambition. And there are some clients that we found, once we start to take them on a journey, I mean, April's brilliant at doing this, is essentially getting people excited by it. And then essentially people start to create a new career. They start to be evangelical, as we all are, about this sort of work internally in the organisation. And, I think Laura Keddy, who April essentially works really closely with, has been exactly one of those people. Who works at Standard Life and for a long time, and essentially this is he's really, really taking it up with both hands and doing a great job.
Yeah. Well, I think that brings it back. It was a great point, Jez, that it's the context piece again, right? So we could all sit down and write those research papers, and in that academic style, we had to do them for our degrees, right? So like I, could sit and write the academic journal article at any point. We can do that. And there are people that love that style, and that's what it's about. And there are some of us that the reason we choose this applied space is being able to communicate it in this way is its own sort of magic and special sauce that's, tied in with being able to make it simple. And I always bring it back. Well, anything I really can, I like to bring back to Einstein, but, where he says, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough, and being able to convey a message in a way that you could talk about it with, a small child, and to be able to explain it. And so I really like to take that no one would say Einstein was dumb because he could explain his methods in a simple way. So that's
absolutely, yeah.
Well, I want to be, of course, respectful of your time. I've so enjoyed the conversation and feel that I could just keep you both captive for the rest of the day chatting about things. But is there anything you wished that I would have asked about the book or the process or other projects you're working on, or anything that you would love to be able to share or talk about?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really interesting process writing the book together. So Jez and I did it very much as a team effort. It was kind of a process of all of the ideas in Jez's head. How do we get them out and onto a page so that it's kind of in a book format? So what we did was we followed this method from some guys in America, which is called the book in a box method. And what we did was we agreed on the structure of the book and roughly what each chapter was going to cover. And then we just sat down for each chapter, and we had a bit of an interview with each other. So I would sit down with a microphone and I would just ask Jez a bunch of questions, and he would basically tell the story of each chapter and all the kind of learnings and stuff from it. And then what we did was we got those recordings transcribed. And so then you have all of his wonderful words there on the page. And then it was basically a case of kind of just wrangling them into a really good structure that was, that kind of made a lot more sense to a reader. Because I'm sure if you've ever tried transcribing one of your own anecdotes, we don't talk in the same way that we write. So yeah, it made it into a really easy and manageable process that I definitely follow again. It felt like a really good way to do it.
That's awesome. In a past life, when we talk about our previous careers, Jez, when I was working in marketing, I started a side business that I figured I was going to be reading and writing a lot anyway. And so I might as well, do that as a job. And so I started doing ghostwriting blogs for people and got wound up editing books for a few years and going through this process of really finding there are some people I think are really good at saying what they want to say. You can get on a stage, you can be in front of a group, you can be on that conference call, and you can just say it and convince people. That's kind of the ad agency guy, right? So perhaps that's our Jez. But those people tend to really struggle with writing their thoughts down. To sit and I'm going to write a blog post is just terrible. Even though you could stand and give the presentation, the idea of doing that is terrible and it feels clunky and it just doesn't sound like you. And then there are people who are really good at writing, but the idea of going up onto a stage is awful and they would never want to do it. And so, but being able to talk to somebody, hear what they're saying, and then translate that so that the written word sounds like you put the, ellipses and the em dashes in the right spot so that you get those pauses and those great words, like you're saying, is a real skill that a lot of people can't do with their own words. You're good in one side or the other. So
I think you're so right. That really resonates with me, Melina, because I'm definitely not the one who can just say my ideas out loud. And I've actually struggled with that as we've all been working remotely as a team. We do a lot of our work and our kind of brainstorming and our workshopping over video call. And a lot of what we do is kind of rewriting copy for clients in really fluent and psychological ways. And for some reason, I can't say it out loud. I have to be kind of typing it. So that's been a bit of a challenge, but we've found ways around it. But yeah, that really resonates with me.
Yeah. So, but that's why you both make such a wonderful team, because you're the two sides of that same coin.
Yeah, no, it's definitely okay. And then I suppose one thing I'd like to add is I really feel that there's been we've talked about a few eras of behavioural science, and I really do think that we're kind of moving on to the next one. And one of the things that we're just trying to, sort of figure out now is kind of like a better, more systematic codification of what behavioural science looks like. So to bring it to life, kind of the listeners, is that for the last 5 years, we've worked on over 50 different major projects. And that might be with an Amazon or a Tesco or a Aegon or Fidelity, or it could be with some small and medium-sized enterprise. But what we've done is throughout the 5 years, we've been codifying essentially what those problems look like. So which of we call them C factors, which of the heuristics and biases seem to be the most prominent in terms of the poor design. So we've got a codification of that. So we're going to be essentially, talking to people about it this autumn, about what a behavioural fingerprint looks like. So we now know what a financial friction fingerprint looks like. So, if you're in the finance industry, these are essentially the heuristics and biases, and we call them the C factors, that get in the way of a good customer or employee experience. And they're kind of a substantiation of kind of what we know. So financial services used to have information asymmetry such that customers didn't know much about the products, and they were missold them. Now the answer seems to be, well, if we send them a 127-page document in a very small font, then essentially they'll read it and they'll fundamentally understand it. And of course they don't, but the business is protected. So complexity and too much information is a huge problem for financial services. And people don't really understand it. So they commit to it. They just scroll through the terms and conditions like we all do on a lot of technology products. Same in financial services. Yeah, that seems fine. I trust the person that's selling it to me. And they divest that responsibility based on that heuristic. And so that's kind of like what that fingerprint looks like. But the brilliant thing is we now know, once we've redesigned it, what a fluency fingerprint looks like. So what essentially in the redesign, what do we change to make it better? And which of the techniques do we use? So which of the C factors do we use? So cognitive easing by chunking is a very, very simple way to offset complexity and cognitive overload. But we've codified that now. And then we've also aligned it to how successful that project has been or not. So what we're now be able to do, and it's early stages, but the database is growing sort of every week, which has been able to say, well, this is how your problem compares to the financial sector at the moment. But we know that given these circumstances, we've solved these problems before utilizing these types of techniques. And these types of techniques, if we use them in this way, are more likely to give us this type of sort of transformation in terms of experience. So we've done that for financial services, we've done it for retail, and we've done it for channels in contact centers and UX. So I think that's a really kind of progressive step, which essentially is utilizing, I suppose, structured data sets, using sort of machine learning techniques to try and understand which of these factors are more or less important and how they interrelate to essentially predict a good outcome. So I think, the codification and the systemization of interventions is something that I think is going to only accelerate as more AI, machine learning, predictive analytics is prevalent. But look out for that from Cowry coming out this autumn. Really, really exciting behavioral fingerprints.
Oh, does sound awesome. I look forward to seeing it when it comes out and to be able to share more about it with the world. So that sounds awesome. Thank you. And for putting in the work to build something that is so complex, but makes everything so simple. I feel like that is like our full circle, nice little bow kind of on the episode, right?
Very, very, very good.
Well, thank you both for joining me on the show today. What's the best way to get in contact with you? Again, there will be links in the show notes for getting Ripple, to Diversify, and to Cowry's website. But what's for people that have questions, want to reach out, how do they find you?
We're both pretty active on LinkedIn, I think. So, very happy to make new connections on LinkedIn. I think Jez is too.
Yeah. I think LinkedIn is where it's at. And then also as well, I think just to give it a little bit of a footnote, there's also a website, ripplebook.com, which is even more information. So if you've bought the book already and you're just waiting for it to be delivered, you can get some sneak previews and some additional content, insights, stuff that we just couldn't fit into the book because there's so much to share. So ripple-book or -book.com.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to have that link in the show notes as well. I was poking around there before we jumped on the call today. So I have the link easy to grab and put in there. So thanks again so much for joining me.
Thank you. Been lovely. Really, really good.
Thank you again to Jez Groom and April Vellacott for joining me on the show today. Cowry is doing such great work, and I really love how thoroughly they think through their projects and propose solutions. One of these great projects on menu optimization is featured in my upcoming book, Unlocked, which is launching in May 2021. There are links for it and so many other amazing items from our conversation today within the show notes for the episode, which you'll find at thebrainybusiness.com/131. Those notes include links to past episodes like those on defaults, priming, and loss aversion, ways to connect with Cowry Consulting, Jez and April, and of course, to pick up your own copy of Ripple, The Big Effects of Small Behavior Changes in Business. And while you're on the Brainy Business website, don't forget to check out the year-end sale, which is ending very, very soon by clicking on the Work With Me tab. When you get a deep dive or virtual strategy session, you get the gift of a free year of membership in the Be Thoughtful Revolution membership group, which is a $1,200 value, a pretty stellar gift you don't want to miss out on. There's a link in the show notes, or you can go straight to the details about the sale at bit.ly/Brainy2020. That's bit.ly/BRAINY2020. Thank you again to Jez Groom and April Velikot, co-authors of Ripple, for joining me on the show today. It was a privilege to learn from and chat with you. Next week on episode 132, it's time for a Behavioral Economics Foundations episode on decision fatigue. It's going to be a lot of fun. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.